Okay, so welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm happy to see everyone here ready to learn about how to know your rights and be empowered. My name is Angelica Escobar. I'm the paralegal at Undocumented Student Services. Part of the legal team and part of the presenting team would be Andres Lemons, our immigration attorney, who will be joining us shortly. And also present, we have our legal intern, Inicia. So we have done variations of this Know Your Rights presentation, but this one is timed just so that we can address some of the post-election concerns and what you can expect for the political climate, and then how to know your rights given this timeline. Um, Also, given, the feeling of being overwhelmed, maybe feeling of some things that are out of your control, I want to take the time to applaud everyone that is in this presentation, in this workshop, because you took the time out of your schedule. Something that is in your control is to learn about, your rights. So I just want to take the time to, applaud everyone for being here and being present. Also, before we get started, I wanted to share if any of you have questions, you can submit your questions anonymously. We'll do our best to screen through the questions. And if for whatever reason we don't get to your question, rest assured we'll go ahead and be sending out the answers to the questions via email. So with that said, we're going to go ahead and get started. Okay, so today's agenda. So what can you expect from this presentation? I like to give an overview so that you know exactly what we're going to talk about. So you kind of prepare yourself to the topics that we'll be discussing. The first thing that we'll be talking about would be addressing immigration statuses. For many folks, we don't know what it means to be undocumented or what are some of the categories while being undocumented. We're going to review those. We also understand the impact of a lot of the topics that we'll be discussing can feel heavy, given that we just had this post-election season, so we have some mental health check-ins, and then we're going to get right into it, right? So last week we had a pre-election Know Your Rights workshop. So for those folks that couldn't attend, we're also doing a recap. So we're going to give you some of the main highlights of that presentation. We're also going to give you information on how to protest safely. We're also going to estimate that, something that important to know is how to understand your power. Just because you're undocumented doesn't mean that you don't have power in your voice and in your being. So we're gonna go through some of the things that you can do to feel empowered. We'll talk about some of the things you can expect under the Trump administration. And then at the end, we'll give you some resources and referrals so that you have them in your toolbox. And then ending with making some time for some questions. And also we'll be providing you with some of our contact information. Okay, just as we do in most of our presentations, a gentle reminder that the content of today's presentation is for informational purposes only. None of the information that we'll be providing today constitutes legal advice. Everyone's questions are very specific, and they're very unique, and they're literally on a case-by-case basis. So if I can ask everyone, if you have any questions, please refrain from being specific. We'd be more than happy to answer those questions in a private appointment with either Andres or myself, but we'd be happy to answer general questions. So, feel free to consult an attorney for an immigration consultation if you have something more specific from anything that we discussed today. All right, now let's understand some terminology. So, what does it mean to be undocumented? And if you're undocumented, who is at risk for deportation? So we have various tiers. So we're going to break it down by categories. So starting at the lower tier, we have the undocumented or the no lawful status group. This group of folks, they entered without inspection, they were not admitted, they were not paroled, or maybe they overstayed their authorized permission, right? Um, the next category would be what I call the temporary category. This group of folks has either DACA, so Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, or those that have TPS, temporary protected status. So under this, so if you have DACA with deferred action, it's basically like a promise from the government that they won't deport you. And DACA does not lead, it does not provide lawful status. So this is only valid during the time that you renew your DACA. Um, and then for those with temporary protected status, folks in this category, it means that DHS designated their country for temporary protection, whether that is because they're going ongoing armed conflict, Example, like they're going through a civil war, or there's environmental disasters or an epidemic or other extraordinary circumstances. Folks that are granted TPS, they cannot be detained on the basis of this immigration status, but it is a temporary benefit and it does not lead to lawful status. The next group above that, the U visa, T visa, such as VAWA, this is the humanitarian group per se. I won't go into the details on the eligibility or the elements of qualifying for each of these reliefs, but I will say that, the U visa is for those victims of a qualifying crime. T visa is for folks that have been victims of sex or labor trafficking. Stitches is special immigrant juvenile status, and then VAWA is Violence Against Women Act. If you're granted one of these statuses, if you meet the eligibility requirements, you may be able to qualify to adjust status and become a permanent resident. The next category up, you may hear of the terms refugee or asylee. The main difference between those two statuses is refugees are outside of the US and asylees are inside the US. If you're a refugee, you're outside of the US and you're of humanitarian concern to the US government. Folks that apply to be refugees or are refugees, they have demonstrated that they've been persecuted or they fear persecution on the basis of race, religion, nationality, membership in a particular group, or their particular opinion, and they may be admissible to the US. For those seeking asylum, they're in the US, and for the same reasons listed, the race, religion, nationality, and also if they hold this status, they may be eligible to apply for a green card. Speaking of green cards, the next category up are those with lawful permanent resident, what we refer to as LPRs or green card holders. And then at the top, we have US citizens. The thing to keep in mind is out of all these tiers, all these statuses, only US citizens are protected from deportation. Your level of protection in any of these tiers really depends on what category you fall in or your loved ones fall in. And it really guides the interaction with law enforcement or immigration authorities. So all the interactions are case by case, depending on the circumstance that you're in. Okay, our first mental health check-in. So we're going to kind of dive right into the presentation, talk about more like heavier topics. So various subject matters that we'll be covering may feel heavy or overwhelming as it affects us differently on our day-to-day lives because they have political and legal implications, right? So they may feel overwhelming, but I do want to recognize that your feelings are valid. You're not alone in this feeling. We're all feeling it. We're here in community. This is a safe space, and overall, we're here as your advocates. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and do the pre-election rights recap. So again, if you missed our pre-election workshop last week, we're going to give you some of the highlights. So the main takeaway from this is regardless of your immigration status, you have unconstitutional rights. Some of the key amendments for you to take note of is the following. So the First Amendment, the right to freedom of speech, assembly, and press. The Fourth Amendment, your right against search and seizure in your home. And the Fifth Amendment, the right against self-incrimination. So these are unconstitutional rights. Regardless of your immigration status, you have the right to exercise these rights. The First Amendment, your right to free speech. This prohibits the government from restricting your right to speech. However, keep in mind that information could be used against someone, say, by the Department of Homeland Security in like removal proceedings. So people who are undocumented therefore should plan carefully when exercising this right because they cannot rely on the courts to protect their First Amendment rights. So an example that we gave last week would be if you're attending a protest and you're protesting femicide in, say, Guatemala, and say you are a citizen of Guatemala and you're in this protest and you're holding a banner or you're saying something out loud connected to, as a citizen of Guatemala, I'm against femicide. You are exercising your freedom of speech, but by saying that specific phrase out loud, it may have legal implications. So be careful when exercising this right because you never know who could be hearing and if that could be used against you, say in like removal proceedings. Part of the First Amendment also is the freedom of expression and assembly. Everyone has a right to carry their opinion to the streets. People have the right to organize and participate in peaceful protests, demonstrations, and you have the right to be free from intimidation, unnecessary or excessive force, and the threat of prosecution and detention. So if you see law enforcement in demonstrations, protest marches, their job is to keep the peace and to protect the public safety and, traffic control. So law enforcement is there to facilitate and not restrict the peaceful assembly. They're not there to choose sides. They are there to facilitate and make sure that no one is hurt, the public safety. Continuing with the First Amendment, you also have the right to be free from retaliation. This prohibits the government from retaliating against you from exercising your rights of freedom of speech and protest. However, what we have seen in the first term of the Trump administration is that the Trump administration had arrested immigrant leaders, activists, and students to retaliate against them for speaking out against immigration policies. So if you're concerned about, your immigration status, or you don't even know what status you may have, or your loved ones, you should think carefully about the risks about participating in a protest, making sure you have a safety plan intact, and consult a trusted immigration attorney when you're deciding whether you should join or what would be the legal implications, if any, for you to participate and exercise these rights. Okay, the Fourth Amendment. Fourth Amendment is the right to be secure in your person, house, papers, and effects. So basically saying your right against unreasonable searches and seizures. So under this amendment, unless law enforcement has a warrant to enter your home, with either they signed off on it and they can slide it under the door, they do not have permission to enter or search any of your belongings. So say someone does show up at your house and they're saying they have a warrant, ask to see it. Don't open the door, have it posted up towards the window, slide it under the door, make sure there's a signature from a judge. And this is your right against search and seizure in your home. You do not have to consent to a search of yourself or your belongings. If you explicitly consent the search, it can affect you later in court. Police may pat you down. They might pat down your clothing, if with probable cause. So, if they suspect that you have a weapon, they may search you after an arrest. Police officers may not confiscate or demand to view your photographs, videos without a warrant, or they may not delete data under any circumstances. So if you do not consent to being searched, say so out loud, verbalize it. Say, I do not consent in search of my person. But keep in mind, you may say that out loud, but if the officer still has probable cause, say like safety concern, you have a weapon, they can still, search your person, even though you said no. The Fifth Amendment, your right to remain silent. So, under the Fifth Amendment, you have the right to remain silent and refuse to answer questions asked by law enforcement, which includes police officers and immigration agents. If a law enforcement officer begins to question you, your response may be, I know my right to remain silent and I choose to exercise it. So this is kind of our, conservative approach to giving you the knowledge that, under the Fifth Amendment, you do have the right to remain silent, but something that we discuss is also learning to kind of like read the environment. You also want to share the humanity of, that you're a human being. So, if the officer's asking you questions and you're not asking specific questions like country of origin or something that might jeopardize your status. Say if they're asking like, oh, if they, you're driving to campus and they're saying, where are you going to? You can feel free to, trust your instinct, read the room, say, oh, I'm running errands. I'm a student at UC San Diego. I am heading back to campus. This shows that you're a student. It shows, that you're in higher education, and it shows that you speak English. So this can help, set the tone for the rest of the conversation. Um, with the Fifth Amendment, you do have a right to speak to a lawyer. So if you're arrested or detained, you have the right to contact an attorney. You can simply say, I need to speak with my attorney. And anything that needs to be verbalized, we encourage you to say so out loud. So if you do want to, you want to exercise your right to remain silent, you may say, I'll answer your questions in the presence of my attorney, or, I have the right to remain silent. Okay, understanding your power. So, what can you do to protest in peace? And are there any legal repercussions for the undocumented community? So, the first question would be, who is at risk for deportation or removal? So, the enforcement priorities change with the new administration. So, under the Biden administration, the current enforcement priorities would be if you entered unlawfully after November 1st, 2020, or if you participated in certain criminal acts, or you're a threat to national security. So under the Biden administration, these folks that we just listed right here, like if they participated in criminal acts or a threat to national security, those would be more at the higher risk of being deported or removed. Criminal activity. So briefly mentioning, what kind of criminal activity we're referring to with someone that may have like a criminal background. Some of the common ones that we see are like marijuana and other drugs. So immigration law treats any marijuana related activity as a crime, they treat it as a crime with harsh immigration penalties, even if it is permitted under state law. So if you have used marijuana or worked in the industry, get a legal counsel before leaving the United States or applying for naturalization or immigration status. Um, what we say is compared to a US citizen, undocumented folks have a higher standard of being a good moral of to have good moral character or be a good citizen. So something that a US citizen might get away with under like state or federal law for marijuana or other drugs, an undocumented person might not have the same not be treated the same under the law. So for marijuana and other drugs that are illegal under federal law, the general advice is to stay away from them. Another note that we'd make under this category would be we understand, there's marijuana culture, so also refrain from wearing things that may bring attention to you, such as wearing like the marijuana plant or like a chain or socks or a hat. Just be mindful of the legal implications that may have. Also, for criminal activity, we have alcohol and driving under the influence. Immigration law can treat alcohol and substance abuse as a ground of inadmissibility or a bar to good moral character. So basically, good moral character is you showing that you're a good citizen, that you're not a threat to the community, you have community ties, you behave in as a citizen would. So this means that you can't be denied from receiving legal residency. If you're convicted of a DUI or multiple DUIs, you can also be denied of immigration benefits. Um, Not only should we encourage you to consult an immigration attorney, but also consult a criminal attorney if you have a criminal background or you and your loved ones suspect you have a criminal background and you want to know what the legal implications are. So what can you do at a protest? There were many tips, many information that we provided at our last workshop. So we're going to give you the summarized 5 points. But if you do want a more in-depth, detailed list of how to protest safely, please feel free to reach out to us and we can give you the slides from the previous presentation, as well as the resources that we shared. But the main five are how you can be safe, how you can protest safely would be one, leave your mobile devices at home if possible, or turn off facial and fingerprint recognition. If you need to take your phone to the protest, just be aware that if you have facial recognition on, it might be easier for someone to have access to your phone as opposed to actually manually putting in a password. So be careful with that. Understanding the environment of the protest, so know the local terrain. Download, print a map of the venue, surrounding areas, know where you're going to be. Are there going to be alleys? Are there going to be street closures? Will you have building access? Knowing your routes can be really helpful in you staying safe and knowing exactly if you need to run, where to run, if you need to hide, where to hide, or just where to navigate, depending on where the protest is being held. Most importantly, also let at least one emergency contact know your plan. Tell a family, tell a friend, tell your immigration attorney, I'm going to join a protest at this time, at this date. This is the venue. This is what we expect. That way someone knows where you are and someone knows what to do if they don't hear back from you. If you have access to an immigration attorney, giving them a heads up and maybe saying, hey, do you mind being on standby? That way you have someone knowing that you're at a protest and you need to call them for whatever reason or a quick consult or guidance, you have access to them. It goes without saying to be alert and stay alert and be aware at all times. Be alert to suspicious persons, activities, and vehicles. Be mindful of press interactions. So consider the risk of talking to the media. If someone like a reporter wants an interview or they want to hear your comment or whatever the case might be wary. And if there is a point of contact for press, refer them to the event organizer. Relating to social media, also be mindful of any pictures that you take at the protest, and you might be implicating, other protesters around you. You don't know their status or if there's a risk of them being shown in your pictures or being tagged in your video. So be wary of social media and press interactions. Okay, interaction with law enforcement. So, in general, during an interaction with, say, Border Patrol, ICE, or other law enforcement officers, the key things to remember is to do not run, do not fight or resist arrest, do not interfere with or obstruct the police, don't obstruct justice, do not lie or give false documents, and stay calm. If you are stopped, ask if you're free to go. If you're in a protest, you're in a group, and the police officer stops the group and they're talking to one person, feel free to say, hey, am I free to go? And if you are, you can just calmly walk away. You have the right to record as part of your right to protest. However, the police can order people to stop interfering with legitimate police operations. So, say it's like a threat to safety, they can ask you to stop recording. Video recording from a safe distance as unobtrusively as possible would be recommended. So that way you're not obstructing any police actions. Any interaction with law enforcement can lead to an ICE encounter, even if you didn't commit a crime or are not charged with offense. Okay, if you're arrested or detained, again, as we mentioned in the previous slide, do not resist arrest, even if you believe the arrest is unfair. You may say that you'll answer questions in the presence of your attorney. You have the right to an attorney. So in comparison to like criminal law, where, an attorney is provided for you, in removal proceedings, the government does not provide you with an attorney. So if you do not have an attorney and you are detained by, say, ICE or DHS, feel free to ask for a list of free or low-cost legal services. They have these excuse me, they have these packets, so feel free to ask for them because you do have a right to be represented in removal proceedings by an attorney. If you're arrested or detained, do not discuss your immigration status with anyone but your lawyer. Again, repeating the phrase, you can say, I'll answer your questions in the presence of an attorney. If you're arrested by the police, you have the right to make a local phone call. The police cannot listen into your call if it's with a lawyer. Do not sign anything. Do not say anything, sign anything, or make any decisions without a lawyer. We keep repeating this, but the importance of not saying more than you need to, or putting your information at risk without your attorney presence is something that we really want to emphasize here. Um, if you're given something to sign, read all the papers carefully. If you do not understand something or you cannot read the papers, or the information on the paper isn't in your native language, tell the officer that you need an interpreter. Because if you sign something that you don't understand, it might have legal implications. So, for example, you may have signed a voluntary departure or a stipulated removal. And if you sign this, you may be giving up your opportunity to stay in the US. Now, with all that information, how to protest safely, those are your general information on how to be safe. But also, we recommend you all and we invite you all to check out the disciplinary actions at UCSD. So, for folks that are attending a university on a non-immigrant visa, your university has the authority to suspend any student. This may include those with the F1 or other visas. Once suspended, it is possible that DHS could revoke or cancel that visa. If the university provides you with an interim suspension, you are afforded due process. So, there is a process for you to be heard, to fight your case. But it is possible that your immigration status may be in jeopardy due to this interim suspension. So again, speak to an immigration attorney to understand the consequences of you not only joining a protest, but the consequences that may be given to you by the university. And we included the website right there, the freespeech.ucsd.edu. It has a lot of useful information if you're interested in that. Now, we have our immigration attorney, Andres, ready to talk about our political environment. So over to you, Andres.
Thank you, Angelica. Hello, everyone. Uh, I just flew from San Diego to Monterey to attend a conference, but I think you can hear me okay and everything. All right, cool. So, yeah, well, thank you for joining. I'm the immigration attorney at UC San Diego. I work for UC Immigrant Legal Services Center, and we provide free immigration assistance to students and their immediate family as well as staff. So I think you all know that already. Anyway, let's get to the slides. So the political environment, what can we expect under the Trump administration? Some of you may have been pretty young when Trump was president before. And so, uh, but but so I'll share some of the things that he did previously, which could kind of give us an idea of what he might do this time. So when he was president before, he tried to eliminate DACA. The University of California actually sued the federal government, alleging that his reasoning for ending DACA was arbitrary and capricious. In other words, he didn't have good reasons for it, and we won. The Supreme Court agreed. Unfortunately, Texas and other states sued, uh, alleging in a different lawsuit, alleging that um, Obama's creation of DACA was unlawful, and that is still being litigated, but that's separate. So, so yeah, he might try to end DACA again through a rulemaking process. We just don't know, unfortunately. We'll keep you posted though. Other things he did regarding family and humanitarian based petitions, slower processing times. It was also due to COVID, but pretty much everything slowed down significantly. And it depends on the city as well. Like right now, adjustment of status in San Diego through marriage is taking, 2 to 3 months, very quick, but that will probably slow down. More requests for evidence. So when someone applies for something, uh, sometimes the government will request more evidence, and we saw that happening more often. So the takeaway is that, we just have to prepare more when we file cases, make sure they're solid, make sure there won't be, that we don't anticipate any reasons for them requesting more evidence and planning ahead since things take what might take longer. Other things that we saw were applications that were filed and denied, it should be denied, not rejected, were issued a notice to appear, a referral to immigration court. And unfortunately, that's scary. What that means is, like, let's say someone's undocumented without DACA, without anything, and they apply for adjustment of status to that of lawful permanent resident. During the previous Trump administration, if that case were denied for whatever reason, then there was a, a substantial likelihood that they would be put into removal proceedings. And so when the government wants to deport someone, they issue a notice to appear. It's a document that says when the person has to go to court. And so that's what that means. So the takeaway again is, we just have to be more careful when filing applications, making sure they're strong and understanding any possible risks. Whereas under Biden, because of prosecutor discretion and the enforcement priorities memo, applications that were denied, nothing would really happen. The person would just lose the money. He also threatened end of birthright citizenship. I think that's would be extremely difficult to pull off. And he might say that he wants to end it again, but I find that very unlikely. In terms of removal proceedings, the courts were faster dockets. They were, getting processed more quickly for merits hearings. Merits hearing is the main court hearing in immigration court. Like first you have the master calendar where you kind of tell the judge what your plan is, what you're going to apply for, what your strategy is for staying in the country, and then eventually you get the merits hearing. Also, a higher standard and burden of proof for asylum seekers, meaning it was harder for people applying for asylum to be granted asylum. So that might happen again. Raids, so there were, more deportations, more detentions, unfortunately. I know this is scary stuff, but we're here to support you all. So, um, next slide. Yeah, thank you. So what to expect? So possible impacts on family and humanitarian based petitions. So like we said, things might just take longer. Even DACA might take longer. So make sure if you have DACA, we always advise people with DACA who are eligible for our services to meet with me or Angelica 6 months before expiration. Issuance of notice to appear, like we mentioned, if the case is denied, there might be a higher likelihood of that. But remember, and and we're gonna I think we're gonna give a training, a webinar on this in the future about what happens if someone's put into removal proceedings. But just a brief ta talk about it is, people are have a constitutional right to due process. They generally cannot be deported from one day to the next. There are exceptions, like if someone has a removal order but never left the country, then the government could just, execute the removal order. Or if someone was removed from the country and then entered again without inspection, then the government could reinstate that removal order and remove them from the country without a hearing. But other than that, everyone has the right to see a judge in immigration court, kind of like criminal court. You can't just be convicted of something one day the next. You get your day in court. And so that's very important to understand. Uh, TPS, termination of TPS designations, that might happen. That did happen last time. TPS is temporary protected status. It's issued to people from certain countries, like in case of earth humanitarian crises like earthquakes, hurricanes, civil unrest, like civil wars, stuff like that. So, for example, TPS was issued to El Salvador, to certain people from El Salvador in the late 90s or early 2000s, and they still have it. So the Salvadorians who were here back then and got TPS, they still have TPS. In contrast, it was issued to Liberians, I think under the Obama administration, or no, before, I don't know. It was issued to Liberians, and then it was terminated. So, long story short, Trump could terminate some of the TPS designations. Some of the new ones are for Venezuelans and Haitians. Uh, Restrictive policies designed to result in more denials. So, you know, he might find ways to make it harder to get a green card. Uh, so, for example, when he was previously president, there were changes to the public charge rule. The public charge rule, well, to apply for lawful permanent residence, you have to be admissible, and the ground of inadmissibility is if you're likely to become a public charge, which means if you're likely to be a burden on the government and not be able to, uh, and just rely on the government for subsistence. So there were a lot of changes during his time regarding that rule that made it more restrictive. A lot of it was just political posturing, I guess you could say, uh, because the rule basically said that if immigrants get public benefits, then it's a lot harder for them to get permanent residence. But most undocumented immigrants are not eligible for public benefits, so it was more just to scare people than anything. But anyway, um, threats of denaturalization. There was an increase of denaturalization under his last uh, presidency, which is the process of uh, so when a non-citizen applies for U.S. citizenship, they naturalize to a U.S. citizen, and so denaturalization is removing that, taking that away from someone, and it could be only be done in limited circumstances. Basically, if they were ineligible for naturalization in the first place, and maybe they lied on their application. So that they might try to process more of those cases. And of birthright citizenship, again, it's very unlikely, but he might try. Another thing to say about all these possibilities is that they might be challenged in court, which is what happened last time. So the last time he was president, one of the first things he did was the what we call the Muslim ban, where he basically prohibited people from certain countries to come to the U.S. and they were predominantly Muslim countries. Uh, a lot of immigration advocates challenged that policy in court, and it was struck down as unconstitutional. So a lot of these things might be challenged by immigration advocates, and they might be temporarily halted or permanently halted. They might go back and forth like DACA. Just keep that in mind as well. In terms of border enforcement, he's talked about militarizing the U.S. border and closing the U.S. border with Mexico, expanding the border wall. Uh, I mean, there's always details. You can't just close a border. You know how many trucks that carry merchandise and food and products, go back and forth every day. It's insane. So, that's something that he's talked about launching the largest domestic deportation operation. So that's the scary one, obviously. Um, so again, that's why it's so important to remember your rights. Um, like if and speaking of which, someone I might as well answer. Someone asked, "What is your recommendation to ensure that what you say is not used against you? How should we refer to being undocumented or being a citizen of a different country that's not the US?" It's a great question. Um, and so for some context, for the government to to deport someone, it's their burden of proof to prove that that person is not a US citizen. Uh, kind of like, well, yeah, in court, there's burdens of proof. Sometimes the defense or the immigration attorneys, we have to prove certain things, like that the person has good moral character. But other things the government has to prove, like that the person is a non-citizen. The easiest way to prove that is when someone admits that they're not a US citizen. Um, or admits, that they were born in Mexico, for example. So, so yeah, the recommendation, refer to, how should we refer to being undocumented or being a citizen of a country that's not the US? Um, I mean, it's tough, but in the perfect world, you just don't, you know, at least not publicly, and definitely not to the government, to the federal government, um, because then they could use that against you, unfortunately. And you have to balance that with your goals. I mean, I don't know if you all heard of Jose Antonio Vargas. He was one of the first people to come out publicly as undocumented. He's a reporter, and he wrote a big article about his life that came out in the New York Times, I don't know, in the early 2010s. And so, he made a calculated decision of doing that, and that was his choice, and it made a huge difference in the immigration movement. So it's also a personal choice what you want to do, but in terms of being the most careful possible, uh, you know, saying that you're undocumented or that you're a citizen of a different country publicly is, carries that risk of then the government could use that to prove that you're deportable. If they can't prove it, if you never admit it, then they can't deport you, basically. So that's the other side of the coin. All right, so let's see. Launch. Oh yeah, so going back to launching the largest domestic deportation operation, this is one of the things he said, which is, yeah, like I said, terrible. And I'm sure you've all read about it and how difficult it would be, how many billions of dollars it would cost. The immigration courts are super backlogged right now. It takes usually years to get a merits hearing. So like if someone's put into removal proceedings and they apply for relief, it oftentimes takes many years to get their hearing, unless they're detained. If they're on the detained docket, then it's much faster. But generally, if you're in the US and you've been here for a while and you don't have criminal history, then you won't be detained, or if you are, you can get um, a bond and bailed out. And speaking of which, if you are a student or you're or family of a student and you are detained by DHS, you contact us and we can definitely try to help with that. Um, so another thing that he's talked about is reinstatement of Remain in Mexico. That was a program back when he was president before, which uh, had to do with people applying for asylum at the border. The normal process historically is that if someone applies for asylum at the border, they're let in, and they get a credible fear credible fear interview, and if they pass, then they get to see a judge for the judge to decide whether they get asylum. With Remain in Mexico, it was different. If people at the border applied for asylum, they would have to wait in Mexico until they'd have to do the credible fear hearing at the border, and then if they pass, then they stay in Mexico until their court hearing, and then they would be bussed in for the hearing, and then if approved, they stay. If not, they are sent back to Mexico. So you might reinstate that. End of parole programs and CBP1 parole programs. there's the one for Ukrainians that allows Ukrainians to enter the US. Um, and then so he might end that. CBP one is an app that people use at the border to apply for asylum. It's a controlled way of managing all the people at the border. So he might eliminate that, make it more chaotic. End of prosecutorial discretion, which is what he did last time. Uh, so prosecutorial discretion is related to the enforcement priorities. So under Biden, the order to the government was that the DHS is supposed to exercise prosecutorial discretion and not try to deport everyone. Only the ones, as Angelica mentioned, the people with certain criminal convictions, threats to national security, and people who entered unlawfully since 2021. So he would probably end that and basically make everyone who's unauthorized to be here um, you know, sub a priority. So they would. So yeah, that's it's unfortunately terrible, and that's connected to the notice to appear thing that I talked about. There was another question. So someone asked, if you apply for asylum but it's still pending, does it fall under the definition of undocumented? I mean, it's kind of yes and no. Um, So when people are in the US, some people are in the US already and they apply for asylum. And it takes right now it takes many years. It's taking over 6 years probably to get the interview, unless they're from like certain countries like Ukraine or Afghanistan. So all that time they have a pending asylum application. They basically have permission to be here. So they're not truly undocumented and they can get work authorization. So it's a little different, but sometimes it does intersect you know, in certain ways. And then yeah, okay. So going yeah, next slide, please. All right, so now we're going to talk a little bit about DACA and advanced parole. I think all of you know what DACA is, so we're not going to get into those details. Advanced parole is something that allows people with DACA to travel internationally for humanitarian reasons, for education reasons, or for work reasons. Oh, it says it there too. So what's the current status of DACA? The case challenging the legality of DACA policy is currently under review by the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. We are now waiting on a final decision or instructions on next steps from the panel of judges. They might make a decision or they might send it back to the Texas court, district court for further adjudication. We just don't know. As of now, the partial stay allows DHS to continue to accept initial as well as DACA renewal requests, but permits DHS to approve only renewal requests and prohibits DHS from approving initial DACA requests. So yeah, some people with DACA can keep renewing it. They can apply for advanced parole. People without DACA, they can apply for it if they qualify, but it'll just sit on the immigration's desk until further notice. And then eventually the case will get to the Supreme Court um, for the final decision. What's the potential impact on DACA? The Fifth Circuit or the Supreme Court, they may terminate immediately. Or no, sorry, the president when he comes in may terminate DACA immediately via executive action or rulemaking. He'll probably get challenged in court if he does that. And he tried before, so we'll see if he does it again. But he didn't do rulemaking, so he might try that, which is what Biden did to solidify DACA. So it's kind of the other side of the coin there. Uh, may allow so when the Fifth Circuit or they might just not do anything and let the Supreme Court decide. But either way, the courts might allow current DACA recipients to keep their status. So once like a decision is made, if they rule that the creation of DACA was unlawful, um, they may allow current DACA recipients to keep their status until it expires, a concept known as winding DACA down. So that might happen. They may restrict renewals or implement changes to work authorization. Um, yeah. And advanced parole, so it still uh, works. People can still apply. It takes a while to get it, like 5 to 7 months right now, but the processing times do fluctuate. There's also a way to get emergency advance parole within a week if it qualifies as an emergency. Um, so yeah. Uh, but the thing is, so yeah, if you apply for advance parole now, it probably won't be approved until Trump is in power. And we'll just have to see, at that time, whether we would recommend traveling or not. It really just depends on that moment when it's approved, because things change so quickly with immigration. So if you do want to apply for advanced parole, definitely talk to us. We could talk about it. We could help with it potentially. Um, but with the caveat that we'd have to reevaluate once the advanced parole is approved. And going back to emergency advanced parole, um, this is a process of getting it at the local USCIS office in your jurisdiction. Um, and so, like, for example, attending a funeral, seeing a family member who's super sick, but even like in educational purposes, like, for example, let's say you apply for advanced parole to study abroad or to attend some conference, and the conference is like a week away, 2 weeks away, and you still don't have advanced parole. Then you could apply for emergency advanced parole, and you could potentially get it. It really depends on the local office. So, like in San Diego, they're pretty nice, but it really depends. They have a lot of discretion there. So next slide, please. So here's some questions and answers. Questions that we've received. If I encounter or am stopped by ICE or CBP, how do I interact with them given that we're in a border town? Yeah, great question. Um, so yeah, we put there, it depends on your immigration status and the circumstances, obviously. So if you're a citizen, you just tell them you're a citizen, whatever. Or if you have DACA, the general consensus is that it's okay to admit that um, because it's deferred action. It's a promise not to deport the person. But if you have no immigration status, it's, I mean, definitely you have to use your common sense, be smart, be respectful. There's no one answer. Every situation is different. Uh, like for example, let's say I'm driving, to LA and I get stopped by CBP. Uh, well, why did they stop me? Maybe they stopped me because my registration is expired, in which case I'll just say, "Oh, okay, I'm sorry. I'll make sure to renew it." And then and that's it. Maybe that's it, and they'll let me go. Uh, or maybe maybe for some other reason. Um, so you can remember, you can use your right to remain silent at any time, but generally it's probably not a good idea to just not say anything at all in the entire interaction. So, you might want to answer questions about what you're doing, where you're going, who you are. But once it starts getting into immigration questions, like, are you a US citizen, or what's your immigration status? That's where you would want to exercise your right to remain silent and not answer, or say or you could say, I refuse to answer. I'm exercising my right to remain silent. There's some great language in the red cards that we're going to get to a slide to in a bit. So so yeah, you just kind of play it by ear, and and let's say the worst thing that could happen, let's say for whatever reason they decide to detain you and take you into custody. At that point, you have the right to an attorney. So yeah, just tell them I want to speak to my attorney, and they should give you access to a phone so that you could call them. Um, and the attorney has a right to go to that place where you're detained and meet with you in private or on the phone and talk to you and figure out a plan. Uh, and then let's say for whatever let me best case they let you go. Worst case, they put you into removal proceedings. Again, you have the right to an attorney at the first hearing. It's preliminary. The decision is generally not made on the final outcome of the case. So there's time to figure out a plan as well. All right. Oh, we're running out of time. Okay, I'm going to speed up. So are UCSD students going to be deported? Great question. It's unlikely. And note that there are processes in place to ensure due process, like the right to an attorney, the right to an immigration judge. But just to give more context, like how would that happen realistically? Like ICE has to have, the information of the person, right? So generally they get it through the police after someone's arrested, or if someone applies for an immigration benefit and it's denied, stuff like that. Or like someone ratting out, not ratting out, but someone like calling ICE and saying, hey, this person is undocumented, blah, 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 that kind of thing. So it's if ICE wanted, like, for example, to get records from UCSD, I mean, that 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 I really don't see how that would happen. Plus, my understanding is that UCSD doesn't, and the UC in general, don't keep that information in the records. So even if ICE got the records, it wouldn't say who's undocumented. So no, I don't think they're going to be deported. I would say generally UCSD is a safe place to be. Uh, all right, so moving on, great questions. Reporting injustices. So what if your rights were violated? You can report it to the Department of Justice, which enforces federal hate crime laws that cover certain crimes committed on the basis of race, color, religion, national origin, sexual orientation, gender identity, or disability. You can also, there's the website to report it. You can also report in similar incidents to the Civil Rights Division. Uh, and well, actually, for violations of civil rights. Uh, and it's important to note that some of these violations could make you eligible for U non-immigrant status, which is also called a U visa. It's for victims of qualifying crimes. There's a whole list, but one of them includes hate crimes, also assault, stalking, kidnapping, sexual assault, domestic violence, extortion, kidnapping. Um, so if you suffered from one of those crimes and you suffered substantial physical or mental harm as a result of that crime, and if you cooperated with law enforcement or are willing to cooperate in the investigation and prosecution, and if the crime occurred in the U.S. or violated U.S. laws, then you could potentially be eligible for non-immigrant status, which uh, provides a deferred action, work permit, eventually permanent residence. Next slide, please. And feel free to ask more questions. I know we're running out of time. Red cards, we have these at our office. You can have one. You can also get them from the Immigrant Legal Resource Service or print them in your wallet. They basically tell you your rights, and they're a good reminder of what you can say to someone. So do not open the door if an immigration is knocking on the door. Do not answer questions from an immigration agent if they talk to you. You have the right to remain silent. Do not sign anything without, so, things we already talked about. It also says give this card to the agent. Um, Although, I mean, they don't have to read it. There's no law that says the agent has to read it. So remember that, and remember that you can say these things out loud. So these on the right are the things you can say. I do not wish to speak with you, blah, 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 etc. So definitely get one of those cards. It could be good language to remember. Next slide, please. Um, Mental health resources, there's caps on campus if you're a student. And I encourage you to reach out to them if you're feeling any harm or distress. For staff, there's the faculty assistance program. Speaking of staff, we also help staff. So if you're a staff member at UCSD and want help with like DACA or advanced parole, feel free to reach out to us or book an appointment. Someone asked her a question, what about those who have PR status through an affidavit? I apologize, I forgot what the context was of that question. Yeah, I'll think about it. Or if you want to add more detail. Next slide, please. There's our resources. You could scan that to get our link tree with all of our links. UC Immigrant Legal Resources Center, legal help, uh, apart from immigration, um, nonprofit. Okay, so someone's asking about the affidavit of support and the public charge. Really, really quickly. That's when someone applies for a green card, they need an affidavit of support. And so what about those have permanent residence through an affidavit of support? Yeah, I mean, we'll just have to see what happens with the public charge rules and how they change, because it really depends on a lot of factors. And Yeah, I'm sorry we're running out of time, but feel free to contact us if you have a specific question. Someone else asked, will California Dream Act be removed? I think that's really unlikely. It's passed by California, and California is generally an immigrant-friendly state, so I think it's very unlikely. And there's our link to schedule an appointment with us and our email address. Um, and yeah, it's 1 o'clock, but we can stay on for a few minutes if you all have more questions. Thank you for joining.
Just a reminder to everyone that we will be providing a copy of these slides and the recording shortly after the presentation. And also if you want a copy of the previous slides from the other Know Your Rights workshop, the pre-election version, also feel free to let us know. But yes, we'll hold on a few more minutes. If anyone has any last minute questions or any comments, we'd be happy to answer them. Okay, I think that is it. Most attendees are leaving. So thank you everyone for joining, and I hope you all have a positive week. Bye, everyone. Thank you on this.
Bye. Thank you.